The Pacific War was a clash of empires, cultures, and fighting philosophies. But for Japanese soldiers, one enemy stood out above all others: the United States Marine Corps. From the earliest landings on Guadalcanal to the final bloody assault on Okinawa, the Marines earned a reputation that was both feared and respected by their adversaries. This is the story of why Japanese troops dreaded facing the Marines more than any other American unit, and how that reputation was forged in blood, sweat, and relentless determination. To understand the roots of this fear, you have to look at the culture of the Imperial Japanese Army. Japanese soldiers were trained to fight to the death, to never surrender, and to view the enemy as less than human. Their own propaganda painted Americans as soft, undisciplined, and lacking the will to fight. But when the Marines landed on the beaches of the Pacific, those illusions were shattered. The first real test came at Guadalcanal in August 1942. The Japanese expected an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that was just as determined, just as willing to fight to the last man, and, most shockingly, just as ruthless. The Marines dug in, fought off repeated attacks, and counterattacked with a ferocity that stunned the Japanese. Night after night, Japanese soldiers launched banzai charges, only to be cut down by disciplined Marine rifle fire and machine guns. The jungle became a killing ground, and the myth of American weakness died in the mud and blood of Guadalcanal. Word spread quickly through Japanese ranks. The Marines were not like other American soldiers. They were aggressive, fearless, and relentless. They didn't just hold their ground, they advanced even when outnumbered and outgunned. Japanese survivors of Guadalcanal wrote home about the devils in baggy pants, the men who never sleep, and the enemy who fights like a beast. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese commanders began to warn their troops, if you face the Marines, expect no mercy. The Marines' reputation only grew as the war went on. At Tarawa, they stormed the beaches under withering fire, wading through chest-deep water and barbed wire to reach the Japanese positions. The defenders fought to the last man, but the Marines kept coming. At Saipan, the pattern repeated: brutal close-quarters combat, no quarter given or asked, and a willingness to take casualties that shocked even the Japanese. The island-hopping campaign became a series of nightmares for Japanese troops, each new battle reinforcing the legend of the Marines' ferocity. But it wasn't just their fighting spirit that made the Marines so feared. It was their tactics. The Marines were masters of amphibious assault, using landing craft, flamethrowers, and close air support to break through even the most formidable defenses. They adapted quickly, learning from each battle and refining their techniques. Japanese soldiers, trained to expect set-piece battles and frontal assaults, found themselves outmaneuvered and outthought at every turn. The Marines' refusal to retreat was another source of dread. Japanese doctrine emphasized the importance of holding ground at all costs, but even they were shocked by the Marines' tenacity. At Iwo Jima, Marines advanced yard by yard, fighting through tunnels, caves, and pillboxes in some of the most brutal combat of the war. Japanese defenders, who had been told that Americans would break under pressure, instead found themselves facing an enemy who simply would not stop. This reputation for aggression and fearlessness was not just a product of American propaganda. It was acknowledged by the Japanese themselves. Captured documents, diaries, and post-war interviews reveal a grudging respect for the Marines. Japanese officers warned their men that the Marines were the most dangerous enemy, merciless in attack, and impossible to intimidate. Some even advised their troops to avoid direct confrontation if possible, focusing instead on ambushes and night attacks. The psychological impact of the Marines' reputation cannot be overstated. Japanese soldiers went into battle expecting the worst, and that expectation often became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Morale suffered, discipline broke down, and the will to fight was eroded by the knowledge that the enemy across the line was not just another soldier, but a Marine. But how did the Marines earn this reputation? What made them different from other American units? And how did their tactics, training, and culture combine to create an enemy that the Japanese both feared and respected? In the next section, we'll dive into the training and ethos of the Marine Corps, exploring how the devil dogs were forged and why they became the most dreaded adversaries in the Pacific. What was it about Marine training and culture that set them apart from every other American unit. In the next section, we'll go inside boot camp, onto the parade grounds, and into the hearts of the men who became the most feared warriors in the Pacific. To understand why Japanese soldiers feared the U.S. Marines more than any other American unit, you have to start at the beginning: Marine boot camp. The transformation from civilian to Marine was, and still is, one of the most grueling, demanding, and psychologically intense experiences in the U.S. military. In the 1940s, it was even tougher. The Marine Corps didn't just want soldiers, it wanted warriors who would never quit, never break, and never back down. Recruits arrived at Parris Island or San Diego and were immediately stripped of their civilian identities. Drill instructors, often veterans of earlier campaigns, barked orders, demanded perfection, and pushed men to their physical and mental limits. The training was relentless: forced marches, obstacle courses, weapons drills, and endless hours of close-order drill. Every mistake was punished, every weakness exposed. The goal was to break down the individual and rebuild him as part of a team, a Marine. But it wasn't just about physical toughness. The Marine Corps instilled a unique ethos. Every Marine a rifleman. No matter your specialty, cook, mechanic, radio operator, you were expected to fight, to hold the line, and to take the initiative when needed. Marines were taught to improvise, adapt, and overcome. They learned to trust their fellow Marines with their lives, to follow orders without hesitation, and to lead when the situation demanded it. This culture of discipline and aggression was reinforced by the Corps' history and traditions. Recruits learned about the battles of Belleau Wood, the devil dogs of World War I, and the legacy of Marines who had fought and died in every corner of the globe. They were taught that to be a Marine was to be part of an elite brotherhood, one that demanded the highest standards and expected nothing less than total commitment. The result was a fighting force unlike any other. Marines were aggressive, resourceful, and unafraid of close combat. They were trained to attack, to seize the initiative, and to keep moving forward no matter the odds. This mindset was perfectly suited to the brutal, chaotic battles of the Pacific, where the enemy was often dug in, the terrain was unforgiving, and the only way to win was to close with and destroy the opposition. Japanese soldiers quickly learned that the Marines were different. On Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, they faced an enemy who refused to retreat, who counterattacked with ferocity, and who seemed to thrive in the chaos of battle. Marines used flamethrowers, grenades, and bayonets to clear bunkers and caves. They fought hand-to-hand in the jungle, in the mud, and on the beaches. They took casualties and kept coming. For the Japanese, who were taught that Americans were soft and would break under pressure, the reality was a shock. The Marines' reputation for close-quarters combat was legendary. Japanese accounts describe the terror of facing Marines in a banzai charge or a night attack. One Japanese officer wrote, "The Marines are not like other Americans. They are fierce, relentless, and without fear. They fight with a spirit that is hard to understand." Another captured soldier told his interrogators, "We were told to expect cowardice, but we found only courage." This reputation was reinforced by Marine tactics. The Corps pioneered the use of combined arms, coordinating infantry, artillery, tanks, and air support to overwhelm enemy positions. Marines were experts at amphibious assaults, using landing craft to hit beaches at unexpected points and then pushing inland with speed and aggression. They adapted quickly, learning from each battle and refining their techniques. Japanese defenders, trained for set-piece battles and static defenses, found themselves outmaneuvered and outthought. The Marines' refusal to surrender or retreat was another source of dread. Japanese doctrine emphasized fighting to the death, but even they were shocked by the Marines' tenacity. At Tarawa, Marines waded ashore under withering fire, losing hundreds of men in minutes, but kept advancing until the island was taken. At Iwo Jima, they fought for every inch, clearing tunnels and caves in some of the most brutal combat of the war. Japanese survivors described the Marines as demons who could not be stopped. The psychological impact of Marine training and culture was profound. Japanese soldiers went into battle expecting the worst, and that expectation often became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Morale suffered, discipline broke down, and the will to fight was eroded by the knowledge that the enemy across the line was not just another soldier, but a Marine. But the Marine's reputation was not just built on fear. It was also built on respect. Japanese officers, even as they warned their men about the devils in baggy pants, acknowledged the Marines' skill, discipline, and courage. In post-war interviews, many Japanese veterans admitted that they would rather face any other American unit than the Marines. But what happened when these two warrior cultures, each trained to fight to the death, collided on the beaches and in the jungles of the Pacific? In the next section, we'll dive into the brutal reality of close-quarters combat and see how the Marines' tactics and tenacity broke the will of even the most determined Japanese defenders. The Pacific War was a war of extremes, of heat, mud, and terror. Nowhere was this more true than in the close-quarters battles between U.S. Marines and Japanese defenders. When these two forces met, the result was often a fight to the death, with no quarter asked or given. For Japanese soldiers, the prospect of facing Marines in hand-to-hand combat was the stuff of nightmares. For the Marines, it was a test of everything they had learned in training and a crucible that forged their reputation as the most feared unit in the Pacific. The nature of the Pacific Islands, dense jungle, volcanic rock, coral reefs, and labyrinthine cave systems meant that battles were often fought at point-blank range. There was no room for maneuver, no safe rear area, and no easy way out. The Japanese, masters of camouflage and ambush, turned every hill and ravine into a fortress. They dug tunnels, built bunkers, and set traps. Their doctrine was simple: hold every inch, fight to the last man, and inflict maximum casualties on the enemy. The Marines responded with equal ferocity. Their training in close-quarters combat, bayonet drills, hand-to-hand fighting, and the use of grenades and flamethrowers paid off in the chaos of the jungle. When a Japanese position was identified, the Marines would coordinate artillery and airstrikes, then move in with small teams to clear bunkers and caves. The fighting was brutal and personal. Marines learned to trust their instincts, to move quickly, and to never let their guard down. One of the defining features of Marine combat was their use of combined arms. Infantry, tanks, engineers, and artillery worked together to break through Japanese defenses. Flamethrower teams would move up under covering fire, torching bunkers and forcing defenders into the open. Demolition teams followed, blowing up cave entrances and sealing tunnels. Tanks provided direct fire support, blasting pillboxes and clearing paths for the infantry. The result was a relentless, coordinated assault that overwhelmed even the most determined defenders. The psychological impact of this approach was devastating. Japanese soldiers, trained to expect frontal assaults and static battles, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The Marines' refusal to retreat, their willingness to take casualties, and their relentless advance broke the will of many defenders. Survivors described the terror of hearing Marine voices in the darkness, the roar of flamethrowers, and the sudden, violent attacks that came without warning. The battles of Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu became symbols of Marine tenacity and Japanese despair. At Tarawa, Marines waded ashore under withering fire, losing hundreds of men in minutes, but kept advancing until the island was taken. At Saipan, they fought through dense jungle and fortified caves, clearing each position with grenades and bayonets. At Peleliu, the fighting was so intense that entire units were wiped out, and the island became a graveyard for both sides. The most infamous battle of all was Iwo Jima. Here, the Japanese had turned the island into a fortress, with miles of tunnels, bunkers, and hidden gun positions. The Marines landed under a hail of artillery and machine gun fire, advancing yard by yard through volcanic ash and shattered rock. The fighting was so close that Marines and Japanese soldiers sometimes found themselves in the same foxhole, fighting with knives, fists, and even rocks. The battle lasted 36 days and cost nearly 7,000 Marine lives, but the island was taken. For Japanese soldiers, the experience of facing the Marines was unlike anything else in the war. Their own propaganda had told them that Americans were soft, undisciplined, and afraid of close combat. The reality was a shock. Marines were aggressive, disciplined, and utterly fearless. They fought with a determination that matched, and sometimes exceeded, the Japanese code of Bushido. Japanese officers warned their men that the Marines were demons who would never stop, never surrender, and never show mercy. This reputation was reinforced by Japanese military propaganda, which often warned troops about the merciless efficiency of the Marines. Leaflets and radio broadcasts described the Marines as devils in human form, capable of superhuman feats of strength and endurance. While some of this was exaggeration, it reflected a real fear, a recognition that the Marines were a different kind of enemy. The psychological toll on Japanese troops was immense. Morale suffered, discipline broke down, and the will to fight was eroded by the knowledge that the enemy across the line was not just another soldier, but a Marine. Some Japanese units resorted to mass suicide or banzai charges, preferring death to the humiliation of surrender. Others fought to the last man, refusing to believe that defeat was possible until it was too late. For the Marines, the experience of close-quarters combat was both a source of pride and a burden. They knew they were feared, but they also knew the cost. The fighting was brutal, the casualties high, and the memories often haunting. Many Marines struggled with the psychological scars of battle long after the war ended. But they also took pride in their reputation, knowing that they had earned the respect of friend and foe alike. But what about the bigger picture? How did the Marines' relentless island-hopping campaign break the back of Japanese defenses and change the course of the Pacific War? In the next section, we'll explore the strategy, the battles, and the legacy of the Marines' advance across the Pacific. The Pacific War was not just a series of isolated battles. It was a relentless campaign of movement, adaptation, and escalation. The U.S. Marines, at the heart of the island-hopping strategy, became the spearhead of America's advance across the Pacific. For Japanese defenders, this campaign was a nightmare that never seemed to end. Each new island brought new horrors, new tactics, and a new level of Marine determination. The concept of island hopping was simple in theory, but brutal in execution. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, the Allies would leapfrog from one strategic point to another, bypassing heavily fortified positions and cutting off enemy garrisons. The goal was to seize airfields, ports, and supply lines, bringing American bombers and ships ever closer to Japan itself. The Marines were the tip of the spear, tasked with making the initial landings, securing beachheads, and rooting out defenders in some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. For Japanese soldiers, the arrival of the Marines meant the beginning of the end. The pattern was always the same: a massive naval bombardment, waves of landing craft, and then the sudden violent assault of Marine infantry. The Japanese defenders, often outnumbered and outgunned, fought with incredible bravery. But the Marines' tactics, coordinated artillery, close air support, flamethrowers, and tanks, were overwhelming. The psychological impact of the island-hopping campaign was devastating. Japanese troops were trained to expect set-piece battles, to hold ground at all costs, and to die rather than surrender. But the Marines refused to play by those rules. They adapted quickly, using intelligence, reconnaissance, and combined arms to outmaneuver and outfight the enemy. When one tactic failed, they tried another. When the Japanese dug in, the Marines brought in flamethrowers and demolition teams. When the enemy counterattacked, the Marines held their ground and then pushed forward. The battles for islands like Kwajalein, Eniwetok, and Tinian were brutal, but it was at Saipan and Iwo Jima that the full power of the Marines' island-hopping strategy became clear. At Saipan, the Japanese garrison was ordered to fight to the last man. The result was a battle of annihilation, with banzai charges, mass suicides, and hand-to-hand combat in the ruins of the island's towns and caves. The Marines took heavy casualties, but they never stopped advancing. The fall of Saipan was a turning point in the war, bringing American bombers within range of the Japanese home islands and triggering a political crisis in Tokyo. Iwo Jima was even worse. The island was a fortress, honeycombed with tunnels and bunkers, defended by more than 20,000 Japanese troops. The Marines landed under a storm of artillery and machine gun fire, advancing inch by inch through volcanic ash and shattered rock. The fighting was so intense that entire units were wiped out, and the island became a graveyard for both sides. But the Marines kept coming, clearing caves with flamethrowers and explosives, fighting for every yard. The iconic image of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi became a symbol of Marine tenacity and Japanese despair. The relentless pace of the island-hopping campaign broke the back of Japanese defenses. Cut off from supplies, reinforcements, and hope, Many garrisons fought to the last man or took their own lives rather than surrender. Japanese commanders, once confident in their ability to hold the islands, began to realize that the Marines could not be stopped. The psychological toll was immense. Letters and diaries from Japanese soldiers speak of exhaustion, fear, and a growing sense of hopelessness. "The Americans are like demons," one wrote. "They never stop. They never give up." Marine tactics continued to evolve. The Corps pioneered the use of amphibious tractors, Amtraks, specialized landing craft, and close air support from carrier-based planes. Engineers built portable bridges, cleared mines, and blasted through obstacles. Medical teams set up aid stations on the beaches, saving lives that would have been lost in earlier battles. The Marines became experts at turning chaos into victory, using every tool at their disposal to break through Japanese defenses. The Japanese, for their part, tried to adapt. They built deeper bunkers, developed new anti-tank weapons, and launched desperate counterattacks. But the Marines' ability to coordinate infantry, armor, artillery, and air power was unmatched. The island-hopping campaign became a war of attrition, with the Japanese losing ground, men and morale with every new battle. The legacy of the island-hopping campaign is still felt today. The Marines' relentless advance across the Pacific changed the course of the war, bringing the fight to Japan's doorstep and paving the way for victory. The psychological impact on Japanese troops was profound, eroding their will to fight and shattering the myth of invincibility. The Marines' reputation for aggression, adaptability, and refusal to retreat became legendary, not just among their own ranks, but among their enemies as well. But what did the Japanese themselves say about fighting the Marines? In the next section, we'll dive into captured documents, propaganda, and first-hand accounts to see how the enemy viewed the devils in baggy pants, and how the Marines' reputation became both a weapon and a warning. To truly understand why Japanese soldiers dreaded the U.S. Marines more than any other American unit, you have to see the war through their eyes. For the men of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, the arrival of the Marines on an island meant the beginning of a nightmare. Their own propaganda, diaries, and post-war interviews reveal a mix of fear, respect, and psychological exhaustion that no other Allied force inspired. Japanese military culture was built on the idea of fighting to the death. Surrender was unthinkable, and every soldier was taught that dying for the emperor was the highest honor. Early in the war, Japanese troops had faced poorly trained or inexperienced Allied units in places like the Philippines and Malaya. But by 1943, the Marines had become a different kind of enemy, one that matched Japanese fanaticism with its own brand of relentless aggression. Captured Japanese documents and diaries are filled with references to the Marines. One officer wrote, "The Americans who land first are always the Marines. They are not like the others. They attack without fear, they fight at night, and they do not stop." Another soldier described the Marines as devils in human form, capable of superhuman endurance and ferocity. These weren't just the words of propaganda. They were the honest impressions of men who had faced the Marines in battle. Japanese propaganda, both for internal consumption and for the troops, acknowledged the Marines' reputation. Leaflets and radio broadcasts warned soldiers about the merciless efficiency of the Marines, describing them as the most dangerous enemy and urging Japanese troops to be vigilant, never underestimate them, and expect no mercy. The message was clear. If you faced the Marines, you were in for the fight of your life. This fear was not just psychological. It had real consequences on the battlefield. Japanese commanders began to change their tactics, focusing on ambushes, night attacks, and defensive positions designed to slow the Marines' advance. But even these adaptations often failed. The Marines' ability to coordinate artillery, tanks, and air support, combined with their willingness to take casualties and keep pushing forward, broke the will of many Japanese defenders. The psychological toll was immense. Letters home from Japanese soldiers speak of exhaustion, fear, and a growing sense of hopelessness. "We are fighting demons," one wrote. "They come at us in waves, never stopping, never afraid." Another described the terror of hearing Marine voices in the darkness, knowing that a banzai charge or a desperate last stand would be met with overwhelming firepower and no quarter. The Marines' reputation also affected Japanese morale in subtle ways. Some units, faced with the prospect of fighting the Marines, began to break down before the battle even started. Desertions increased, discipline suffered, and the willingness to fight to the death was eroded by the knowledge that the enemy was not just another soldier, but a Marine. In some cases, Japanese officers even advised their men to avoid direct confrontation with the Marines if possible, focusing instead on hit-and-run tactics or delaying actions. But the respect was real too. In post-war interviews, many Japanese veterans admitted that they would rather face any other American unit than the Marines. They spoke of the Marines' discipline, their skill in close combat, and their refusal to retreat. "They are not like other Americans," one officer said. "They are fierce, relentless, and without fear. They fight with a spirit that is hard to understand." This grudging respect was echoed in the way Japanese commanders planned their defenses. When intelligence reports indicated that Marines were coming, extra precautions were taken. Bunkers were reinforced, ammunition was stockpiled, and every man was warned to expect the worst. The arrival of the Marines was seen as a sign that the battle would be long, bloody, and likely lost. The Marines' reputation also became a weapon in its own right. The psychological impact of their presence often did as much damage as their bullets and bombs. Japanese troops who believed they were facing the Marines sometimes surrendered more quickly, fought less aggressively, or even abandoned their positions. The fear of the Marines became a self-fulfilling prophecy, weakening Japanese resistance and making victory easier for the Americans. But the Marines paid a price for their reputation. The expectation of relentless aggression and refusal to retreat meant that casualties were often high. The pressure to live up to the legend was immense, and many Marines struggled with the psychological scars of the brutal combat they endured. The respect of the enemy was hard-won, and it came at a cost. So what is the legacy of this fear and respect? In the final section, we'll explore how the Marines' reputation shaped the outcome of the Pacific War, influenced post-war military culture, and continues to inspire both awe and debate to this day. The story of why Japanese soldiers feared the U.S. Marines more than any other American unit is more than just a tale of battlefield terror. It is a lesson in how reputation, culture, and relentless determination can shape the outcome of a war and echo through history. By the end of World War II, the Marines' reputation was legendary, not just among their own ranks, but among their enemies and allies alike. The Japanese had learned, often the hard way, that the arrival of the Marines meant a fight to the finish. The psychological impact of this reputation was profound. Japanese commanders who once believed in their own invincibility now planned for defeat when they knew the Marines were coming. The mere rumor of a Marine landing could sap morale, disrupt defensive plans, and even lead to preemptive withdrawals or desperate last stands. This fear was not just the result of propaganda or myth. It was earned, battle by battle, on the beaches of Tarawa, the ridges of Palayu, the caves of Iwo Jima, and the cliffs of Okinawa. The Marines' willingness to take casualties, to adapt tactics, and to keep pushing forward no matter the odds broke the back of Japanese resistance. Their mastery of amphibious assault, close-quarters combat, and combined arms warfare set new standards for military operations. But the legacy of the Marines in the Pacific is not just about fear, it's about respect. Japanese veterans in post-war interviews often spoke with admiration for the Marines' discipline, courage, and refusal to give up. They were not like other Americans, one former officer said. They were relentless. They fought with a spirit that was hard to match. This grudging respect helped lay the groundwork for the post-war reconciliation between the United States and Japan, as former enemies came to see each other as worthy adversaries. The Marines' reputation also had a lasting impact on American military culture. The lessons learned in the Pacific about the importance of training, adaptability, and teamwork became part of the Corps' DNA. The phrase, "every Marine a rifleman," became more than a slogan. It was a way of life. The Corps continued to emphasize close-quarters combat, small unit leadership, and the ability to improvise under fire. These qualities would serve the Marines well in Korea, Vietnam, and every conflict since. The psychological warfare waged by the Marines, intended or not, became a model for future generations. The idea that reputation can be as powerful as firepower, that the enemy's fear can be a weapon, is now a standard part of military doctrine. The Marines' example showed that winning the battle for the mind is just as important as winning the battle for the ground. The legacy of the Marines in the Pacific also lives on in the stories told by veterans, historians, and filmmakers. Movies like Flags of Our Fathers, Letters from Iwo Jima, and The Pacific have brought the brutal reality of island warfare to new audiences. Museums, memorials, and reunions keep the memory alive, honoring the sacrifices of those who fought and died in some of the most difficult conditions imaginable. But perhaps the most important legacy is the lesson that courage, determination, and the willingness to adapt can overcome even the most daunting challenges. The Marines who fought in the Pacific were not superhuman. They were ordinary men who rose to extraordinary heights because they believed in each other and in their mission. Their story is a reminder that reputation is not just about what others think of you, but about what you prove day after day in the hardest moments. As you finish this documentary, think about what the Marine story means for us today. Is it a lesson in the power of reputation? A reminder that fear can be both a weapon and a weakness? Or simply a story of how ordinary people facing impossible odds can change the course of history? Whatever it is, let it inspire you to face your own challenges with the same spirit of determination and hope. If you've enjoyed this journey through the story of the U.S. Marines in the Pacific, please like, comment, and subscribe for more untold WWII stories and deep dives into the people and events that shaped history. What do you think is the most important lesson from the Marines' reputation in WWII? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing your take. Thank you for joining us on this march through history. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep remembering the real stories behind the legends.